It wasn't just another American fighter. It was the machine that would end an empire's dominance in the skies. On the morning of June 19, 1944, dark blue Hellcats screamed down from the sunlight over the Philippine Sea, tearing through Japanese formations with ruthless precision. To every Japanese pilot in that burning sky, the message was undeniable. The age of the Zero was over. The F6F Hellcat wasn't merely an improvement. It was a predator, engineered to hunt the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0 with cold mathematical efficiency. Its 650 caliber Browning machine guns converged at the perfect killing range. Its armor plating turned near-fatal hits into survivable dents. And at its heart roared the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a 2,000 horsepower engine capable of pushing the Hellcat to 380 miles per hour, climbing at over 2,500 feet per minute, a beast born for combat. What happened that day over the Philippine Sea wasn't a battle. It was an execution. In what American pilots would remember as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost nearly 480 aircraft. The Americans lost just 33. This is the story of how the F6F Hellcat became the most successful naval fighter in history, achieving an unparalleled kill ratio of 19-1, and how it crushed the once invincible Zero in one of the most decisive carrier battles ever fought. The road to that day began 2 weeks earlier, on June 6, 1944, when Task Force 58 steamed out of Majuro Harbor in the Marshall Islands. It took 5 full hours for the last ship to clear the anchorage, a vast armada, the largest carrier force ever assembled, heading for the Marianas. At its helm was Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitcher, a legendary aviator who had been flying since 1915, commanding from his flagship, the USS Lexington. His fleet was immense. 15 fast carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers, spread across miles of Pacific blue. The carriers alone carried 956 aircraft, 475 of them F6F Hellcats. Task Force 58 was divided into 4 powerful groups. Task Group 58.1, under Rear Admiral J.J. Jocko Clark aboard USS Hornet, included Yorktown, Belleau-Wood, and Baton. Task Group 58.2, led by Rear Admiral A.E. Montgomery aboard USS Bunker Hill, carried Wasp, Monterey, and Cabot. Task Group 58.3, under Rear Admiral J.W. Reeves from USS Enterprise, included Lexington, Princeton, and San Jacinto. Task Group 58.4, commanded by Rear Admiral W.K. Harrell aboard USS Essex, included Langley and Cowpens. Against this overwhelming power, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa could muster just 9 carriers with about 430 aircraft, the first mobile fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy. His flagship, the massive new Taiho, was joined by the Pearl Harbor veterans Shokaku and Zuikaku, along with Junyo, Hyo, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. But numbers told only half the story. Most of Ozawa's aviators were inexperienced replacements, pilots with fewer than 100 hours of flight time. Some had barely 50. Many had never fired their guns in training. Japan's fuel and ammunition shortages made such luxuries impossible. The Americans, by contrast, had trained for this. Their pilots averaged 300 to 400 hours of flight time, with extensive gunnery practice and full carrier qualifications. On June 11, 1944, Task Force 58 launched its opening strikes. Fighter sweeps and bombing runs hammered Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, catching the Japanese completely off guard. They had expected the next American assault to strike the Carolines, not the Marianas. Only about 50 land-based aircraft defended the islands. In the first sweep alone, 208 Hellcats destroyed 86 Japanese planes. The systematic destruction of Japanese air power in the Marianas had begun. Among those leading the assaults was Commander David McCampbell, commander of Air Group 15 aboard the USS Essex. A 34-year-old Alabama native, McCampbell had once struggled with gunnery training. His pilots had even helped him qualify by secretly marking their bullets with his color. Now he stood on the edge of history. Within months, he would become the U.S. Navy's top ace. On June 15th, American troops landed on Saipan. In response, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, activated Operation A-Go, Japan's desperate bid for a decisive battle. Every remaining ship and aircraft was thrown into the fight. Ozawa ES strategy relied on coordination between his carrier-based aircraft and the land-based squadrons from Guam and Tinian. He also counted on the longer range of his aircraft. They could strike from beyond the reach of American planes, land on Guam to refuel, and hit again. But Ozawa underestimated the American edge. Task Force 58 had radar systems capable of detecting incoming raids 150 miles away. Each carrier's Combat Information Center could track and vector Hellcats into perfect intercept positions. And the Americans possessed a deadly secret: proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells classified at the time that could tear apart any aircraft breaking through the fighter screen. Most of all, Ozawa didn't realize that the F6F Hellcat had been designed for one purpose: to kill the Zero. At dawn on June 19th, preparations began aboard the carriers. In the ready room of VF-16 aboard Lexington, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander WWII checked his gear. An ace with 12 kills already, he had spent months flying as wingman to the Navy's first great ace, Edward Butch O'Hare. Now, WWII was about to carve his own legend. At 07:45, the submarine USS Albacore, under Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, fired 6 torpedoes at Ozawa's flagship Taiho. A Japanese pilot, Warrant Officer Sakio Komatsu, spotted the torpedoes and, realizing what was coming, deliberately dove his plane into one of them, sacrificing himself to save the carrier. His heroism destroyed one torpedo, but another found its mark, exploding beneath Taiho's forward elevator. The damage seemed minor at first, but ruptured fuel lines filled the ship with volatile fumes. An inexperienced damage control officer made a fatal mistake. He opened the ventilation system to clear the air. Instead, the gasoline vapor spread through the decks. Hours later, at 15:32, Taiho exploded and sank, taking 650 men with her. At 08:30, American radar screens lit up with the first wave of enemy aircraft. 69 Japanese planes launched from Ozawa-S carriers at extreme range. Vector 250, Angels 25, bogies approaching, crackled over the radios. Hellcats already airborne climbed hard for position. Others roared down the decks, catapulted into the blue. Commander Charles Brewer, leading VF-15 from Essex, was among the first to sight the oncoming enemy. "Tally-ho! Bandits bearing 265, distance 40 miles, Angels 18. What followed was the finest hour of American naval aviation. Hellcats from multiple carriers closed in, guided by fighter controllers who could see the entire sky on their radar scopes. The Japanese pilots, many young, brave, and untested, held formation, flying straight and level toward their targets. It was their first and fatal mistake. Lieutenant Commander Paul Buell, leading VF-16, later recalled, "They came in perfect formation, like they were on parade. Our guys couldn't believe it. They just held formation while we shot them to pieces." Commander McCampbell spotted the enemy from 25,000 feet and dove to attack. "I made a high-side run," he later wrote. "Only my starboard guns fired, which threw me into a violent skid. The Judy I was chasing tried to escape, but the Hellcat was faster. His 6 guns tore through the sky. The Japanese Judy dive bomber erupted into flame. McCampbell destroyed 5 Judys that morning, then 2 Zeros that afternoon. 7 kills in a single day. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Alexander WWII faced a different challenge. His Hellcat's supercharger malfunctioned, limiting speed and altitude. Forced to break from his squadron, he turned back toward the fleet, only to spot a formation of Judy dive bombers heading straight for the American ships. They were so thick against the water, he recalled later. I felt like a kid with a plate of cookies, afraid someone else would take some before I could get them all. In just 8 minutes, firing only 360 rounds, 10 bullets per gun per kill, WWII shot down 6 dive bombers. When he landed, he climbed from his cockpit and, still wearing his gear, held up 6 fingers for the camera. That image, the smiling young ace with oil-streaked face and confident grin, became an icon of victory. He later discovered his Hellcat's wing pins had been partially unlocked the entire flight. He had fought his greatest battle with his wings barely secured. The first Japanese wave was annihilated, 42 of 69 planes shot down. The few survivors who made it back reported only horror. Hellcats everywhere, attacking from above, from the sides, from impossible angles. The second wave, 128 aircraft launched at 09 hours, fared even worse. By now, every Hellcat in Task Force 58 was airborne or poised to launch. Radar directors had perfect tracking data. The Japanese flew into a wall of blue fighters waiting at the ideal altitude. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia of VF-9 aboard Yorktown had developed what he called the mowing machine, a deadly formation tactic using overlapping fire zones. Alongside James French, Clinton Smith, and Harris Mitchell, Valencia's division would claim 50 victories during the war. On June 19th, they helped turn the sky into a slaughterhouse. Fighting Squadron 1 from Yorktown, led by Commander Smoke Stranahan, claimed 37 Japanese planes in a single day. Lieutenant George Carr became an ace before lunch. At 24,000 feet, Hellcats dove into enemy formations 10,000 feet below, 6 guns blazing. The technical superiority was absolute. The Zero weighed just over 5,300 pounds, fragile and agile but unarmored. The Hellcat, more than 12,000 pounds, carried armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a frame built to absorb punishment. A Zero's fuel tank could explode from a single tracer hit. The Hellcat's would seal itself shut, rubber layers swelling around punctures. The Zero's engine produced 1,130 horsepower. The Hellcat's, 2,200 in combat boost. It could climb, dive, and accelerate faster at every altitude. Even the guns told the story. 6 Brownings against 2 20mm cannons with only 60 rounds apiece. Hellcats could fire long, controlled bursts. Zeros had seconds of ammunition to spare. At 10 a.m., the third wave of 47 Japanese aircraft took off. They soon lost their bearings. Only 7 ever returned. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, a Pearl Harbor veteran, crash-landed on Rhode Island after running out of fuel. His plane was riddled with holes. "I never saw so many Grummins," he said in disbelief. Commander James Jigdog Ramage, leading Bombing Squadron 10 from Enterprise, later said, "Our fighters had a field day. The Japanese came in perfect formation, and our boys just cut them to pieces." The fourth and final wave, 82 planes launched at 11 hours, was slaughtered in the same way. Even veteran American pilots began to feel pity. Ensign William Spider Webb of VF-2 recalled, "They were so green. They didn't even try evasive maneuvers. Brave men, flying straight into death." Not everyone survived the day. Commander Charles Brewer, who had led VF-15 into battle, was shot down and killed over Guam after scoring 3 kills himself, a reminder that even in a turkey shoot, war demanded its price. At 11:18, the submarine USS Kavala, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, struck next, firing 6 torpedoes into the carrier Shokaku. 3 hit home. The Pearl Harbor veteran sank with heavy loss of life. 2 of Japan's greatest carriers, Taiho and Shokaku, were gone. And the day was only half over. By now, the Americans' radar advantage had proven decisive. The SK and SK-2 systems could detect enemy aircraft 150 miles out, giving Mitcher AS Task Force 30 to 40 minutes of warning. ample time to ready fighters and anti-aircraft guns. June 19, 1944, the day the Hellcat ruled the sky. In 8 hours of combat, American naval aviation shattered Japan's air power forever. The Zero's reign was over, and in its place stood the Hellcat, the blue-winged machine that sealed victory in the Pacific. They fought in skies that burned with tracer fire and sunlight. Men separated by faith, language, and empire, yet bound by the same fate that hangs over every battlefield. The Japanese still relied on their eyes, their instincts, and the flash of sunlight on a distant wingtip to warn them of death approaching. But for the Americans, war had entered a new dimension, one measured not by courage alone, but by technology, coordination, and the calm voice of a controller speaking through static. Lieutenant Joseph Edgar, fighter director aboard the Lexington, could see the entire battle unfold on his radar screen, tiny green blips moving like pieces on a chessboard. From his darkened combat information center, he guided fighter after fighter into position, intercepting 35 enemy aircraft with precision and almost mathematical control. His voice remained steady, even as dozens of Japanese planes closed in. Vector 270, Angels 20, bogies approaching, intercept and report. The new fighter direction system changed everything. Each carrier's combat information center, dimly lit, filled with radar scopes, plotting boards, and radio chatter, became the nerve center of modern warfare. Fighter directors like Edgar could now command the skies, orchestrating defense as if conducting an invisible symphony. The Japanese, fighting with only their eyes and instinct, never stood a chance. Among the men in the air was Lieutenant Commander William Killer Kane, leading Air Group 10 from the Enterprise. In his diary, he would later write, "The greatest air defeat suffered by any nation ever. He had started the war in outdated planes, flying against Japanese masters who once ruled the Pacific skies. Now he led men in Hellcats, fast, armored, and devastatingly lethal, guided by radar controllers who could see everything. The transformation had been total. American pilots, once outmatched, now trained under a system unmatched anywhere in the world." By mid-1944, new aviators arrived with 300 to 400 flight hours, veterans before ever seeing combat. They had practiced carrier landings dozens of times on Great Lakes training ships, fired thousands of rounds in mock dogfights, and learned to trust both their machines and each other. Japan, by contrast, was collapsing from within. Once, its airmen trained for over 500 hours before facing combat. By 1944, desperate for replacements, boys were being sent to war with barely 100 hours of flight time, some with less than half that. The veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway were gone, replaced by inexperience and fear. The American rotation system ensured that hard-won experience was never lost. Heroes like Lieutenant Commander John "Jimmy" Thatch, the man who had invented the famed Thatch weave, were brought home to train new pilots, passing on everything they had learned. The Japanese, clinging to a warrior ideal that forbade retreat, kept their best pilots in combat until they died. By June 1944, Japan's skies belonged to the dead. Even in communication, the Americans held the edge. Pilots spoke through reliable VHF radios, using standardized code phrases and clear tactics. "Break right. Blue 2. 0 on your 6. Roger. Breaking right. Thanks, lead." Those simple exchanges saved lives. The Japanese, their radios unreliable and often discarded to save weight, relied on hand signals invisible amid the chaos of battle. By noon on June 19th, the slaughter was complete. The Japanese had launched 373 carrier aircraft in 4 desperate waves. By the time the sun reached its height, 346 of them were gone. The Americans had lost only 33 planes, most to operational mishaps, not enemy fire. The sea around Task Force 58 was a graveyard of burning wreckage, black oil, and drifting life rafts. From the Lexington's flag bridge, Admiral Mark Mitcher looked out across the horizon, smoke curling from distant fires, and said quietly, "The Japanese carrier air force has been destroyed. They'll never recover from this." He was right. Japan hadn't just lost aircraft. It had lost its future. The carriers could be rebuilt. The men could not. That afternoon, American fighters continued their assault over Guam and Rota, catching Japanese planes as they tried to land and refuel. Squadrons like VF-16 flew multiple sorties, their victory tallies rising with each mission. By day's end, Japanese losses, including land-based planes, had reached nearly 480. Below deck, maintenance crews worked like magicians. Damaged Hellcats were patched, engines swapped, bullet holes sealed. Within hours, aircraft that had limped home were ready to fly again. The logistics machine that powered the U.S. Navy was unmatched. Spare parts, ammunition, and fuel flowed endlessly from mobile workshops and supply ships. Across the sea, Japanese ground crews scavenged parts from wreckage, fighting not the enemy but the slow death of exhaustion and scarcity. As the sun fell on June 19th, Admiral Ozawa still believed victory was possible. His surviving pilots claimed hundreds of kills. In truth, they had destroyed almost nothing. His fleet was crippled, his air wings annihilated, and his pilots broken. Yet he did not yet know the scale of his ruin. The next day would make it undeniable. On June 20th, the Americans struck back. Search planes had been scouring the Pacific since dawn. At 1540 hours, Lieutenant Robert Nelson from the Enterprise sighted the Japanese fleet, 275 miles west of Task Force 58. It was an extreme range, and launching so late meant their aircraft would have to return in darkness. But Mitcher didn't hesitate. "Launch them!" At 1624, the order went out. Deck crews raced across the carriers, loading ordnance, folding wings, fueling engines. The sky thundered as 216 aircraft roared off the decks, 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, and 54 torpedo planes. Every man who took off knew what it meant. They were flying to the edge of their endurance. Some would never make it back. But this was their chance to finish what they had started. Over the endless blue, Lieutenant Commander David Ramage led his dive bombers into the fading light. Below him spread the remnants of Japan's might, 3 carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers. The few Japanese fighters that rose to meet them were swiftly cut down by escorting Hellcats. The attack that followed was furious and chaotic. The carrier Hiyo was struck repeatedly by bombs and torpedoes and went down in flames. Zuikaku was hit hard. Chiyoda and Junyo left crippled and burning. The battleship Haruna took a direct hit, and 2 oilers were sent to the bottom. But victory came at a price. As darkness fell, the pilots turned home, many low on fuel. The radios filled with quiet desperation. "This is Blue 7. Engine quit. Going in. Red 3 ditching. Send help." One by one, fuel gauges sank toward 0. Then Mitcher made a decision that would become legend. Against every rule of wartime caution, knowing submarines prowled nearby, he gave the order, "Turn on the lights." Instantly, the Pacific night bloomed with radiance. Every ship in Task Force 58 switched on its lights. Searchlights piercing the dark, flight decks glowing like floating cities. Even star shells arced upward to mark the way home. One pilot would later say, "It was like Times Square in the middle of the ocean." Lieutenant Commander John Gray of VF-18 remembered, "I was down to fumes when I saw those lights. It was the most beautiful sight of my life. I didn't care which carrier, I just needed a deck. I landed on Yorktown instead of Hornet, but they took me in like I belonged there. It was chaos. Planes crashing, decks jammed, pilots ditching beside destroyers, but most of them made it home. Of the 216 planes launched, 80 were lost, yet most of the men survived. 49 aircrew never returned, but compared to the Japanese losses, it was a miracle. Commander Cahan wrote in his diary that night, Mitcher took a hell of a risk lighting up the fleet, but he saved a lot of good men. That's the kind of leader men will follow anywhere. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was over. In 2 days, Japan had lost nearly 600 aircraft, 3 carriers, and 2 oilers. More devastatingly, it had lost almost all its trained carrier pilots. The Americans lost 123 planes, most from fuel exhaustion, not enemy fire. The numbers told a simple truth. Japan's naval air arm was finished. The Hellcat had proven itself the ultimate weapon of modern aerial warfare. The F6F-3, the main variant used at the Philippine Sea, was a masterpiece of design, 42 feet, 10 inches across, 33 feet, 7 inches long, armored, and unstoppable. Its self-sealing fuel tanks could take a beating and still feed its roaring Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, a 2,200 horsepower beast that could bring a pilot home on half its cylinders. Its 650 caliber Browning machine guns, 400 rounds each, spoke in thunder. When those 6 streams converged at 300 yards, nothing survived. Every detail had purpose. The cockpit gave perfect visibility. Controls were smooth and instinctive. It was a pilot's aircraft, steady, strong, honest. By 1944, Grumman was building 500 Hellcats a month, 1,275 in total. Everyone identical, every part interchangeable. That precision, that reliability, was the American advantage made manifest. Japan could no longer match it. Their Zeros, once elegant, were now handmade in declining quality, their engines starved of fuel, their airframes fragile. Pilots flew on fumes and faith, knowing their machines could fail before the enemy ever found them. Even the fuel told the story. American planes burned 100-octane gasoline, clean, powerful, perfect. The Japanese fought on 87-octane fuel, their engines coughing and failing as the war ground on. The United States had mastered the machinery of war. Behind every Hellcat was a fleet of oilers, tankers, machine shops, and mobile repair bases. Japan had courage. America had the means to turn courage into victory. And yet, in the end, it wasn't just industry that decided the battle. It was belief. The American pilot believed in his machine, his training, and the men around him. He knew that if he fell into the sea, others would come for him. The Japanese pilot believed only in duty and in dying for it. The difference was everything. The survivors of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot carried that message back to every ready room across the Pacific. The Hellcat had become legend. Its 19-to-1 kill ratio, not propaganda, but fact. It destroyed over 5,000 enemy aircraft, securing the skies from the Solomons to the home islands. In later battles, men like Commander David McCampbell would shoot down 9 enemy planes in a single mission. His wingman claimed 6 more. 2 men, 15 victories in 1 flight. The embodiment of air supremacy. By war's end, the Hellcat had flown more than 66,000 combat sorties, dropped over 6,500 tons of bombs, and reshaped the face of naval warfare. Its design became the blueprint for every American fighter that followed. Rugged, powerful, and built to bring its pilot home. Looking back, the Battle of the Philippine Sea was more than just a victory. It was the moment industrial might and disciplined training eclipsed raw spirit. Where once Japan's warrior code dominated the Pacific, now it was steel, precision, and relentless production that defined the future of war. Admiral Ozawa survived the war. In later years, he would reflect on that June day, acknowledging that the battle marked the end of Japan's naval aviation. The Hellcat, America's blue machine of war, had broken the Empire's wings forever. Commander McCampbell, the top Hellcat ace, said it best. The Hellcat was an honest airplane. It did exactly what you asked it to do. It brought you home. And so, as the sun sank over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, the skies fell silent. Japan's naval air arm was gone, its legends reduced to smoke and shadow. The dark blue fighter with the white star had ended an era, and in doing so, it had proven beyond doubt that the outcome of the Pacific War would be written not in blood alone, but in the power, precision, and unyielding spirit of the F6F Hellcat.